Hello, everyone, and welcome to the December 13th. Yep, that's the right date. Product Analytics Sync. Hope everyone's doing well. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. Awesome. Cool. Then we'll go ahead and get started with the board review. We have a couple issues here that we are still open for pre-aggregations and session analytics. I just don't think that's been the focus, Max. I think, is that the case?
No, I've been working on them. There's no specific sort of outcome for them. It's more about just learning how they work, how we're going to use them. And they've sort of spawned a few open MRs, the first of which, pre-aggregation, I've been working on today, making sure that works. There's a point in the agenda later on to discuss how we want to go ahead with that in the future. But short version is pre-aggregation works and makes a big difference. Session analytics, made a big progress on that. There's an open MR that needs to be merged by yourself, Dennis. But I think Tim's been testing that out this morning and appears to be, as far as I can tell, mostly working quite well.
Awesome. Should we go ahead and move these in development then, I guess, as an in progress state for investigation issues? Or
yeah, I
how
guess
are we
so.
feeling about that?
Move them into in dev and then we can close them once that MR has been merged, I think.
Yeah, I think they can just jump straight into that state and then right out of it. So cool. Because I assume there were other issues for the work you've been doing so far, but that's that assumption. Cool. Adding support or adding a button to go back to the tracking view from the dashboard listing is unassigned and blocked. So we'll just keep moving on. Adding support for pre-aggregations around a user's anonymous ID. I feel like that's also part of the investigation and pre-aggregation at this point. Or is that a new one?
Yeah, no, that's part of the pre-aggregation. Yeah, that's what I'm working on too.
All right.
You can feel free to assign that to me if you want.
Yeah, we can reassign that perhaps and then go from there. All right. Cool. Then we have all the in-dev stuff. So there are onboarding issues. Axel, you have the first one.
Yeah, so I'm working on it. Hopefully I move it to review today or tomorrow, and this will unblock the first one that we had on unblock, the one to go back. So hopefully I can also work on that as a follow-up. That one, yeah.
Awesome. And then Rob, you have the next one.
Yeah, apologies. My camera doesn't seem to want to work today. I'll figure that out after this meeting. Waiting for the stack setup is in dev. It's good, making decent progress. I've got the basic UI in. Now I just need to add the functionality to trigger the GraphQL endpoint. So it's going okay.
Awesome. Let us know if you need any help with that. I have the next one for the demo test GitLab instance to connect to the, Sandbox cluster. Have not made progress on this one. I've been focused on the internal handbook and then also the production change request, which is happening actually after this meeting. And then I guess as an aside, the internal handbook MRs were merged, and I suppose we'll see that in the verification section, or it's already been closed, but we can go talk about that later when we get to it then. We've already covered Max's issues. So, oh yeah, sorry. It's in review here. Tracking the needs, new tracker on the internal handbook. That's been merged. That's already collecting data. So that's good. I have noticed some weirdness with the Jitsi configurator, which I'm investigating because it likes to just forget sources and destination configurations. I'm not sure why, which can cause issues with event collection. So I'm going to be digging into that hopefully later today. Like I mentioned before as well.
Quick question on that, Dennis. The last I knew about this, there was a discussion around GDPR and cookies and stuff. Has that all been resolved? Because that's the reason why that's in review at the minute.
As far as I understand, they have the person opening that discussion hasn't yet responded, but they have also pushed the changes forward in a separate MR. So as far as our concern in terms of tracking usage, this is in, I would say, verification, or actually we can probably go ahead and close this because I've already verified that we're collecting events.
Okay,
that
cool.
discussion is still, I'm not sure what's happening with that discussion, to be honest, but I responded. Eugene McMahon has also responded. So any other follow-ups with that discussion, I'll keep the group in the loop. But yeah, that's all I know at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And then actually after this meeting, I'm meeting with John Jarvis to get the production chain request hopefully sorted out. And hopefully we can get that going for both staging and production. And yeah, hopefully that goes smoothly. Next up, we have dashboard list of dashboards, but Jan is unfortunately not available right now. So we will move on to the next issue, which Rob, you have.
Yeah, so this has already gone through review with Axel. Thank you very much for your brilliant review. Passed on to maintainer. Don't expect any major issues. Should be merged in the next day or two.
Awesome. And then Axel, you have the follow-up for single stat.
Yeah, that I just updated the title for fixing the method to get grid attributes on the dashboards, and that's basically what it is. And I have just started to ask reviews, so yeah, maybe it won't be maybe we won't have any issue there because it's more of a technical dev thing, more than a feature. But yeah, I asked reviews from Gian and Max.
Great. Okay. And then as far as we don't have a bookmark for the last, I think there was no new issues. I think that was the last of it. So we had the line chart as our last closed issue. So then we can take a look at what we've got so far. We've got the table merged in, the single stat as well. It's not available, but Axel, was there anything you wanted to mention about the single stat rendering widget?
Oh, yeah, we introduced a pretty neat transformation layer that I have been repeating that word a lot. And we do have a couple of follow-ups from that, like the one that I'm working on right now. And yeah, now let's move on with the bar chart.
Awesome. And then we have create the baseline application for the onboarding app. Rob, anything you wanted to call out here?
It took far longer than it should have, but I'm glad it's in. Is my response to that. It has unblocked every other piece of onboarding work, which is brilliant.
Great. All right. And then I think I've already mentioned the internal handbook, so that's live and running and collecting data. So it's good to see the progress so far.
For that last one where you're seeing the data, are you seeing anything interesting or a lot more volume than we've been seeing previously, or what sort of things are you noticing in the data coming in?
I haven't done any analysis yet, but the volume isn't perhaps the most. I mean, I don't think there's been like a significant increase in volume, I would say. I guess partially due to the fact that most everything goes to the external handbook by default, and then anything that's more confidential or safe or such go into the internal handbook. But yeah, I haven't done any analysis to really say like anything different other than we're now casting a wider net on things. That said, as I mentioned before, the one thing I did notice, which isn't really particularly related to the data, is that the Jitsi configurator can sometimes forget where data is supposed to go when you're sending the events. So I don't know if people have seen it, but sometimes you'll see the post requests fail. So that's something that I find quite concerning that I'm going to be taking into today. So yeah, but as soon as that's sorted out, then I'll definitely be looking to look at the schemas that Max put together and start playing with the data, and also update the test data set for those who want to take a look at themselves.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
Sounds good.
All right.
I believe that around the monthly PI review, there will be a lot more events coming in, because then that's the main reason for looking at the internal handbook to some extent. So
yeah. So my main priority is to make sure that the events actually go where they're supposed to when that happens then, because the ClickHouse server is doing fine. So that's not the issue. But anyways, I'll keep everyone updated on that. In addition to that, Sam and I have done milestone pre-planning, and I think we've established some good themes for the upcoming milestone. So please take a look at that planning issue. Sam, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, just take a look at that. If you have comments about what's there that you think shouldn't be, or things that aren't there that you think should be, please let us know. We're going to be doing final planning to nail this down to specifics and have the 15.8 board set up later this week. I believe tomorrow actually. So still some time for feedback on that if you have any of it. And Tim, looks like you've got the next one.
Yes, if I find my unmute button. So I watched the recording from yesterday's front-end discussion and the front-end sync, where it was a lot about how much we should move forward versus how much stuff should be tied up and how big MRs should be and so on. And so I wanted to basically take the discussion from there also to this meeting and come up also with some guidance that I gave, for example, Jan, that I believe is important around where we are heading and how fast we should be heading. This is clearly right now, we are at the point where we are trying to deliver something for internal usage only, and basically starting to experiment with it. And we are exploring also a lot of things that are definitely not yet on anyone's radar, and you can find out by the implementation already a lot of the things. So my general guidance around stuff that needs to be merged is always code-wise, it has to be production quality. If it goes into master, it needs to be production quality, nothing around the code itself. So it shouldn't affect anything else. It shouldn't be taking any shortcuts in that sense. It should be there and complete and following all the guidelines. Function-wise, it definitely can be that it's, as long as it's not public, that it doesn't have fully tied up all the ends and is completely fully functional. So this means like that if you click save right now, you will not get basically an actual save, but will see the code display. And we shouldn't build some workarounds now for the next 1 or 2 months, in the sense of building something that explains you for 5 hours what is currently happening on this page and what will be happening, but rather have in mind where we are going to head next. It's clear that we will have, especially during this integration phase, which is a classic problem of starting greenfield work with especially larger MRs, that if you tend to have very small MRs, the problem is that you have, of course, that kind of overhead. And that also means that you will have a lot of unlogical MRs, as I call them, because you have a functionality that you can't test, which is also taking more time than most of the time to figure out. So I think it's also important that we simply can have ends that simply have currently a constant init option, etc. And we should always have the focus on smaller MRs, but it's clear that also simply setting something up will have a larger MR simply implied to get something moving. Otherwise, you will end up with unlogical MRs. So really just code blocks that don't do anything, that are not usable, that are not testable on the spot, but are rather just there. And which also work for bigger features, I would say, that are already released, but it's definitely harder and is not necessary to some extent if you anyhow have not this to the public, and this is basically hidden behind 5 feature flags. Keep in mind, everything that we are doing right now will be reworked and reiterated anyhow, but it should definitely have the target to be usable and shipped. It's definitely clear that, especially as we don't have a UX counterpart, the level of detailed and polishedness might be something that will definitely increase and change over time. But it's also clear that some things that we implement right now anyhow get reworked because we figure out during the implementation that we find something else that is needed, and we need to get it there first to figure something out. A good example is if you look at the data table that just landed. The data table right now is nice because it gives you a list of data, but is it usable? Is it people have the feeling that this is great? No, most probably not, because the URLs are cut. You can't click on them. You can't copy paste at them. So this is exactly what we are trying to do: is have a data table as soon as possible to get data in, to figure out what we need on top of it, and then figure out also and highlight this by the whole team, is to highlight and say, hey, I just implemented data table, but I think we need an option how to configure columns, because right now the URL is 20% and the count is 80. And that's something that we, I think, have a very clear feedback loop going from engineers and people using it to the PMs, and then hopefully at some point also to UX, which is very important. Overall, and seeing and taking a look also what Sam is highlighting here with the signal boosting, this is a huge topic for GitLab. And we make good progress. I'm happy with the progress in itself, but have we shipped anything? Not really. Have we shipped anything that has already made some impression? No, because we are connecting the dots here. But I think we have the possibilities to make quite a nice impact on one end, in the sense of showing something that we are way beyond, for example, a monitoring dashboard solution that was implemented in the past, that was only YAML based, but have something where we can iterate very fast. And to some extent, this is both internally and externally important, because having a dashboard that has 2 line charts and a count is, for the outsider, most probably not the thing that will say, hey, here's my money, take my money. And I think this is to some extent where we need to show up and figure out, and this is a classic startup phase where we might also pivot and figure out, hey, this is something where we can get very fast to, and this is something that might take longer. So we should get started there and so on. So I think it's important that everyone is aware of that, and we are moving in that kind of way to get to results that are making a splash and can be also very strategic. Very good example is the editing of dashboards. I think this is maybe not as important for analytics right now, but it's super important for Optimize, because this is something, if you look in the threads, you have almost on a weekly level by now, you have enterprise customers. Hey, I want to have a dashboard with those 5 projects and not just 1 project. So I need to click 5 times around. And that's what the editable dashboard, for example, can provide them. Yeah, a lot of talking, questions, comments, feedback.
Yeah, I wanted to better understand from my understanding from the front end retro and what you're saying, it seems like we've been in alignment as far as like quality versus like the pace of iteration. What I wanted to better understand is that you mentioned a couple of times like the line charts and like the dashboards that they stand maybe aren't providing that wow factor, and that's why we're looking at things like the query designer. But how does that work with our values in terms of like trying to pursue boring solutions? Because I think we are setting the stage with like some very important features for other groups like editable dashboards and schema-driven dashboards, and using those to build boring solutions. But then, if we're trying to think like a startup and then go for bigger features, how does that go and like work with us experimenting, but also shipping production level code? It just seems like some of these themes kind of work against each other.
I think that the best alignment is the early GitLab phase, where it was all the time try like a test balloon in a certain area, get this to a version that does something meaningful, and then try to get the next test balloon running and see if that does something meaningful. And if one of those test balloons gets a lot of traction, then you invest even more. So having a widget designer, for example, to, on one hand, explore the data, but also on the other hand, make the dashboards really editable and meaningful, then also beyond the first dashboards that we are going to provide, can give us the feedback loop if people really would like to work with this and have basically more detailed statistics around, hey, I want to know who from the United States is looking at this and that page. And has basically definitions on this. So this is not going maybe on 100% maturity straight away, but setting basically test balloons up to see if you can get traction, and way beyond a level of the classic startup, hey, here's a sign up page with my idea and there's nothing behind it. So I think we have a couple of Lego stones here. That might, especially with the setup that we have with Cube, that are very easy adaptable. And that's, for example, the widget designing stuff is like really easy stuff. And that's where it can then get the impact to some extent, I believe.
So then how would you balance then composing and chasing these test balloons versus actually like working towards a plan to get features in front of the users? Because I feel like that's what the internal preview and the customer preview are about, so that we can establish a feedback loop with people that are actually using it beyond just ourselves. I do agree that it's good to experiment and get those test balloons so that we can see where we want to head to next, but there's only 4 engineers on the team. Part of why we haven't shipped is because we didn't really have that much engineering capacity for the first few months of the team being put together. So, you know, we're obviously resource constrained. That hopefully changes with the investment themes for next year. But, you know, how would you recommend then, you know, do we suggest moving people off of the internal preview to explore these things like integrating the widget designer, or?
Okay. No, I think it's simply important that we take into consideration to have that reviewed and also invest time into getting that moving. That's why I'm working, if I have time, on stuff that is way step number 3, 4 after the actual roadmap. If the roadmap that you have currently sketched out, Sam and you, if I wouldn't agree to it, I would shout, basically. I think this is exactly where we want to be heading, but it should be also clear that while we are heading in that direction, we need to have a certain kind of pace and basically also highlight if we can take something faster or slower, or if something takes longer, so that we can have this amount of output at the end of the day. I think that's the main topic here, is to see if we see that something takes much longer, that we highlight this, so that we have this drive forward around the work that you're classically sketching out. And I think that's totally fine and it's good. But that's where I'm trying to connect now the dots more with Manage, Plan, Optimize by now, that they are also starting to work actively on the dashboard editing, for example. And where can we, number 0.8 is really about exactly one of those shortcuts and what you think about that we can take that. So.
Okay.
Make sense?
So I think part of this also really speaks to how our iteration value works here at GitLab and how challenging iteration truly is. Iteration means that we're going to take small steps, but it doesn't mean that we don't have a longer term goal of where we ultimately want to get to. Some of the things Tim's mentioning about like wow factors and things we want to do in the future, that's where we want to get to. But also, like we talked about, we haven't shipped anything to customers or to end users yet. Those are our first steps, and we need to take boring solutions to get there. One of the hard things I think, and I haven't read the notes from that front end meeting, so maybe I'll talk through some of this. But I think one of the challenges with our iteration value is to be able to identify, here's what our long-term vision is that we're ultimately going to work towards, versus these are the tactical steps we need to do today as the first small iteration to get us closer to that. So doing things like the internal preview are going to be critical so that we get something out to internal users. Then the customer preview of we get something out to end customers that they can use, with our ultimate long-term vision being this, you know, amazing, completely perfect thing that will take more time to realize along the way.
Yeah, and I can echo a bit of what I mentioned yesterday, that I said that, and this is maybe not as related, but I do believe we are in a good place, at least in the front-end team, in which we are flowing. That's for putting a word, and we are getting better at iterating that. As Sam said, it's like it is a challenge to learn how to do it properly here at GitLab. So yeah, but now like the sentiment on the thing, I believe is positive.
Good. So if there's nothing else, then I'm jumping to my next point, and I'm looking at time. We are horrible running out of time as always. Saving dashboards. So I took a look we could save dashboards already with the commit API. So I think we discussed this 2 weeks ago around a solution also with the plan optimize group. So to simply have like a pointer to a project where the dashboards are stored. And using the API would enable us to simply say, okay, we just have basically the project ID, would give enough for the front end to go ahead, have dashboards editable and savable, have widgets editable and savable through that API. But of course, it doesn't send it through the schema. Now, my suggestion is to go ahead and that we take a look, can we really do this? And simply take a fixed director on a different repo as a first step. Because I believe that as we are constrained with Max on the backend side, I rather would like to see him on funnels and such topics. And I'm quite clear that you will agree on that. And then in a phase 2, replace that with having a central point in the front end code part, which basically takes, okay, that's dashboard, save it with that name, that's widget, save it with that name, and basically replace that central part against a specific API at some point. What are your thoughts?
I think when you say using the commit API, you mean committing, generating the JSON for the dashboard and committing it on their behalf, or creating an MR for them?
Committing it directly to the other repo, because that would be the problem, that if you have a locked project and you make changes in the editor and say save, and then it's like, yeah, hey, by the way, I'm creating now an MR. And so the first place would be 100%. You can only target a project that has basically no rule. Use the same APIs that the web IDE does, and there you have basically always the option, send it to an MR or commit directly to master, if that is possible.
Yeah, that's the thing. My concern is that, yes, from a usability point of view, the fewer barriers to getting dashboards updated, the better. However, there are so many ways in which an MR can be held up, like code owners, approval rules, external status checks. And we're targeting GitLab Ultimate initially, at least. And these are the customers with the most stringent compliance requirements. And I worry that we're setting a dangerous precedent by saying, yes, you must always put changes through full MR approval processes. Oh, except in this case. I worry that won't be well tolerated.
No, that's the point, that you can only target. So you have a project where you have dashboards in there, and this project gets basically appointed to another project.
Oh, I see. Right. Yes.
To make
this is following the group project templates idea, just for context.
Okay. Yes, I withdraw my concern. That sounds fine.
Yeah.
I'm still questioning whether some ultimate customers in very stringent compliance environments would even allow that to happen. I still feel like there are some which would need that chain of custody, and they need that step where someone else has confirmed that what they're doing is valid. A bit like we don't just let anyone edit our SciSense dashboards. There are some which are proper restricted because it's unsafe data. So in my head, that's where I sort of feel like I would rather go on the side of caution and have everything an MR, and then introduce the ability to go direct to commit than the other way around, if that makes sense.
The problem is really with the MRs, this becomes to some extent, especially for experimenting at the beginning, a usability nightmare. I think that
the problem is we've done no UX research, so we don't know if there's any usability nightmare yet. But from a legal compliance perspective, there is a problem.
In terms of iterating and boring solutions, what I would suggest, since we are over time at this point, is that we go with having just, we show just the code today. We do the existing MR flow, if we get feedback that it is going to provide a lot of friction for users that want to do experimenting, then we can also look at what those ultimate level customers would need to do more of a directly committing workflow. But I think if we have our first steps being you go through a merge request, that would actually be preferable to me.
The problem is you can't then even see a new widget. You can't add anything to the dashboard. This makes iteration-wise, this makes it 10 times more complex. Any sort of MR. But I'm happy that we can to have a graph and play it through. But editing with MRs in between becomes horribly complex in a complete new UI. I know this still from the Web IDE times when they started. I think it took them 4 months to implement the workflow of having MRs and not being able. So this makes basically suddenly saving and adding new stuff 4 months out. So.
Well, because of the complexity about this, I think this is definitely one of the areas we need to have UX research look into and propose different solutions to figure out where's that sweet spot between security and compliance concerns versus ease of use, and where do we end up ultimately landing there. Like Rob said, we don't have a UX person to start on that right now, so this could be something they could jump into in the new year as well.
The UX person is months out. So I would rather say April before they can start. Yeah, we can discuss this. Good. Do we have anything else that we want to go through?
I've got an item that can be async in there.
Yeah, mine can too. That's fine.
Yeah, and adding the additional tracking, I will take this most probably to the product intelligence team directly, that they get started on that. For heavy, so that we get right now, what we are only collecting on the internal handbook is just page views, but we should have also click events data and also get product area IDs and stuff like that. So that we can play around with that part. Good. Good. Then thanks everybody.
Thanks, folks. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye.